How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program today, I'm happy to take your reactions as well to the State of the Union. 877-973-7425. Don't forget to text Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777 if you want to get on the show today, or you want to get the links, the show notes, the podcast, the social media feed. It is all there. I want to move on myself from the State of the Union to some of the other stuff that's out there in the news that we need to talk about. I will get to your phone calls here shortly. First, I want you to think about Iran. We apparently now know that the president's team briefed the Gang of Eight in the U.S. Congress yesterday at 3 p.m. The Director of Central Intelligence and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, were both there. Chuck Schumer said afterwards only that the president would have to make his case to the American public. It appears that we are headed towards a war footing. There is reports today that the Chinese intend to send high-speed, they call them supersonic or hypersonic missiles, to Iran to test out on the American warships. They can take out ships 200 miles away. The situation is escalating. I was reading John Ellis this morning. John Ellis is one of the Substacks I subscribe to. And John Ellis made a very good point today, that the Iranian regime looks very much like it is on the verge of collapse. There is growing dissident activity inside Iran. There is growing activity in Iran to destabilize the regime. There's growing activity in Iran by Iranian dissidents themselves that could be enabled by the United States. We know, for example, that the United States has given Starlink access inside Iran. They have passed out routers. The Iranians are trying to wipe out that access, but they have not been successful in doing so. The Americans, the Israelis, and others have been arming dissidents within inside Iran, and those dissidents outnumber the government. You know, if you listen to my interview the other day with Alireza Jafazadeh, one of the points that he made is that the Iranian people overwhelmingly oppose the Iranian regime. And this is something that you probably have a hard time wrapping your head around. How can it be that so many millions of people oppose the regime and yet the regime is allowed to exist? Well, there are a couple million people inside Iran who support the regime and they're armed. It's the 20 million unarmed people that are the problem for the Iranian regime, or the 10 million unarmed people who oppose them, to the 2 million who are armed. The 2 million who are armed are well armed. They can kill the 10 million. They don't care, by the way. That's the other thing you have to understand. You have a level of empathy and compassion in your heart. You cannot understand a regime would want to wipe out 10 million of their citizens, but the regime wants to survive. And to survive, they can't have those dissidents that outnumber them so much in power. So the American government can arm them, can put further sanctions on Iran, can destabilize the regime economically enough that some of the 2 million who support the regime begin to turn on the regime as well, that it's not worth it for those people. There are ways for us to do this without actually having to militarily engage. What is notable is that Axios, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post have all run stories in the last 48 hours that say basically the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is advising the president of the United States that if you go into Iran, Iran may respond in such ways to drag you further in. That doesn't mean boots on the ground. It means the United States goes into Iran with missiles and planes, not boots on the ground. And Iran responds and attacks our friends and allies in the area. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, fires missiles. The Russians and the Chinese arm Iran. And Iran retaliates against us through our allies. Iran no longer has its proxies. It would have to do it directly. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is concerned that it would become a tit for tat. We would go after Iran. Iran would go after our allies. We would defend our allies, go after Iran. They'd go after our allies. We would defend our allies, go after Iran. And the circle would continue, dragging us further and further in, consuming manpower, consuming weapons, consuming munitions, consuming lives. He's got concerns. The fact that the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, all of them have these stories. And remember, they don't have reporters at the Pentagon anymore. These were not stories that were leaked. These were clearly stories planted by people close to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you know anything about this business, and you know when you see stories like this in multiple news outlets that are all reporting the same thing in the same way, this was a well-sourced and placed story with an agenda. And the agenda was clearly the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff trying to raise red flags to the president of the United States through media means that they know the president consumes. The president, whether you want to believe it or not, does pay attention not just to Fox News, but to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal in particular. The president's very old school. He pays attention to the old media outlets, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, two of the big staples from the 80s and the 90s. The president pays attention to them. Been to his office before he was president. He had the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal on his desk. He pays attention to them. So when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is signaling through those media outlets that he has serious concerns about American engagement in Iran, the president is probably paying attention to those concerns and is probably considering some level of limited strike. How do you, however, do a limited strike that doesn't cause you to engage further when Iran strikes back? That's the question. What you could do potentially is further arm the dissidents and the resistance, smuggle weapons into Iran, smuggle internet into Iran, shut off Iran from the rest of the world, shut off Iranian banking access, shut off Iranian oil shipments, shut off Iran economically, shut off Iran as best you can militarily with the outside world. And then there's the option closer to home. And again, John Ellis pointing this out. What about Cuba? What about Cuba? We've got the island surrounded. It's cut off from the world. We're having to allow in humanitarian energy supplies just to keep the hospital power lights on. The regime there appears to be on the verge of collapse. The regime there appears very much like it has a matter of weeks to survive. There's a Russian ship coming with oil, and the president's team, to a degree, appears to be willing to allow the Russian shipment of oil to go to Iran because they're completely out of power and the hospitals are running out of power, and they do need some means of power. But the Mexicans have stopped shipments. The Venezuelans have stopped shipments. The Iranians can't get shipments in. They're having to rely on Russian oil, and the Russian oil is coming in so cheaply because of what we've done to Russia with sanctions that the Cubans can buy it, but even still the Cubans can barely buy it because the situation in Cuba isn't stable. So why don't we freeze out Iran while we do regime change in Cuba closer to home? And we don't even have to go into Cuba militarily. Here's what I think most of you understand is that the diaspora of Cuba is broad and is deep. It is deeply inside the United States and Western Europe. It is deeply intelligent. It is deeply invested in regime change in Cuba. The moment the Cuban regime goes away, you're going to have a flood of American expatriates from Cuba flooding back to Cuba. I know people who, I've got good friends of mine. They live down in Miami. They are American citizens, but their grandparents fled from Cuba. They are dying to go to Cuba. One of them is an engineer. One of them is a banker. They would be first on the ground to reset up the banking system, reset up the power systems in Cuba. You would have American money flood into Cuba. In the private sector, our private sector would explode helping Iran or helping Cuba. And all you got to do is freeze out Iran. And so what we're doing in Cuba, toppling the regime and the way the regime appears like it can be toppled, could then be replicated in Iran over time as we continue to build the pressure in Iran without missiles, just blockading and embargoing and sanctioning, just like what we're doing in Cuba. You begin slowly over time to destabilize the regime in Iran, but the more rapidly destabilized regime is Cuba. So can the president pull this off? There are whispers in Washington, D.C. that this may be where Marco Rubio is thinking. There are whispers in Washington, D.C. that Rubio sees Cuba as more likely to fall than Iran immediately, but you can continue to build up the pressure inside Iran for Iran to fall. And meanwhile, the president can continue to say he hasn't started a war. If you go into Iran with missiles and you start blowing up the regime, you're probably going to be invested in a while to blow up the regime. The president doesn't have to do that if he builds pressure to destabilize it, and he funds and arms the dissident insurgents inside Iran. And in the meantime, he focuses on Cuba. And then you've secured the Western Hemisphere. You've rooted out the Chinese communist spy operations inside Cuba. They're gone. You've rooted out the Cuban mercenary regime. They're now out of the Western Hemisphere, unfunded, destabilized. They go away. You've got Cuban expatriates inside the United States who repatriate to Cuba. You bring in the American banking system. You bring in the American technical system. You bring in the American engineering corps. You bring in the American power systems. You bring in Florida Power and Light, for example, the Southern Company. They got a lot of Cubans at Florida Power and Light. Send them down there. Let FPL rebuild Cuba's power grid. Bring in the American private sector hospital influence to Cuba. The American supply chain goes to Cuba. We get wealthy. The Cubans get rebuilt. The communists go away. The Chinese are out of there. And then you just keep arming and funding the dissidents in Iran until they're at a point they can destabilize and overthrow that regime, because that regime is going to topple. It is at this point only a matter of time. Why? Because Hezbollah is gone. Syria is gone. Hamas is gone. The Houthi are undermined. You've got Russia and China propping up Iran. They can only do so much when they're distracted with, for example, Taiwan, with China. Now their assets in Cuba are out of that country because we've collapsed Cuba. The Russians are tied up in Ukraine. We have so many options right now. I was intrigued by the John Ellis piece, in large part because when you're at the point of having the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff clearly leaking directly to media outlets that do not have reporters inside the Pentagon. Remember, they refused to sign Pete Hegseth's pledge on media coverage, and so they were booted out of the Pentagon. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, they do not have reporters at the Pentagon, and yet they clearly had spoken to people close to, if not directly to, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff with his concerns about dragging the president into Iran. The president loves to say he hasn't started wars. This could be one he can't get out of. It could bog him down. It could get his supporters to turn on him. Or you could just build up the efforts of the dissidents in Iran, let them overcome the Iranian regime, while you in your own backyard focus in the next month on bringing down the Cuban regime and providing the Cuban communists a way out of the country, because their time is up and they appear to know it. So finding a safe haven for them outside of Cuba so that we can rebuild Cuba. There are multiple paths here for the President of the United States of America to bring about regime change in Iran and in Cuba without an American missile fired. By the way, it's worth noting, neither Joe Biden nor Barack Obama ever considered doing that. Neither Joe Biden nor Barack Obama ever had the wherewithal to think in such a strategic way to bring about regime change in either one of those countries. In fact, Obama and Biden wanted to prop up the Iranian regime and prop up the Cuban regime. They wanted to revitalize both regimes. Here comes Donald Trump, and he's on the verge of taking both of them out. That would be a good thing for the whole world. All right, folks, to the phones we go, 877-973-7425. Up first is Bill. Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show. Bill, how are you?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hello? Yeah, I just wanted to, think that Trump really messed up last night. the economy stuff, he focused on the same things that made Biden fail. He focused on statistics that are really meaningless to the bottom 50% of the economy. It basically indicates how people don't understand the difference between a mean and an average, and the mean being the middle point. The middle point is not any better off than they were 12 months ago. That's what's true. And under Biden, it took 4 years. He drove it down by 20% and then managed to finally get it back. But effectively, the median person is not much better off now than they were 50 years ago. And under Trump's first administration, they were for the first time in many, many years. And he didn't point that out. He didn't point out what he had accomplished in his first term. He didn't point out, what he was doing to help the bottom 50% who don't even pay taxes. So all his tax things and all that stuff is meaningless. And then he used the eggs thing, which was like the bird flu. It's like he just gave people reasons to discount what he was saying when he's actually done a lot of really good things that over time should make a difference.
Bill, you mentioned his first term. So Gallup pointed out yesterday that the last time a majority of Americans felt good about the economy was in January of 2020, Donald Trump's first term, right before COVID hit. That was the last time more than 50% of the United States felt good about the economy. And I do think he's got to get that back. And I think last night was the start, not the end. Talking about the reduction in inflation, talking about the reduction in gas prices. Gas prices meaningfully impact everybody south of the middle. The gas prices, if anything, probably do impact the working class, the middle class, more than the rich, who a lot of whom have switched to electric cars, not the middle class and the poor who are still putting gas in their cars. So this is the beginning of the argument, not the end of the argument. We got to see where he goes with this, but he's about to barnstorm the country to try to make that case, and I'm hoping he can make the case and recall the very first term. Now, I got to tell you about the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. You can get 3 of them, and they got a money-back guarantee, by the way. If they don't wipe out odors, you can get a money-back guarantee. You go to EdenPureDeals.com, and you put in the discount code ERIC3, ERICK3. You can get 3 Eden Pure Thunderstorms, put them in a bedroom, put them in a kitchen, put them in your basement, put them in your RV, keep one in your travel bag for when you travel. They wipe out litter box odors. They wipe out dirty diaper odors. They wipe out all smoke odors. They eliminate odors. They also kill 99.9% of bacteria and viruses, and they're filterless and still trap the dust, the pollen, the pet dander. They just work, too. Get 3 of them, save $200, EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ERIC3. And if they don't wipe out the odors like they claim they will, and by the way, they will, you got a money-back guarantee. See the site for details at EdenPureDeals.com with the discount code ERIC3 to get 3 of them and save $200. Start wiping out your odors wherever they exist. No odor can stand up to the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ERIC3, ERICK3 at EdenPureDeals.com. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson here, taking your phone calls, your reaction to the State of the Union and more. 877-973-7425. Patrick, you're going to be up next. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon, Eric.
Thanks for joining me.
I want to tell you how much I appreciate you. I really do. Not only the fact that you're intelligent and that you can explain complex topics of the day clearly, but that you're a believer. And that really impresses me as a Christian myself.
Listen, you clearly, you didn't say that to the call screener. He wouldn't have let you on. So I appreciate you sneaking past him.
Well, I'm sorry he feels that way, but the truth is the truth. I just wanted to quickly touch base on last night. I know you want to move past this, but I spent the entire hour and 45 minutes. I didn't jump off early. I got right on when it began the broadcast. And we already knew this, but what was just so obvious last night, and you've already mentioned this, that the Democratic Party and Democrats always just seem to be on the wrong side of the issue. always. If I can't think, quite honestly, I'm 67 years old. I cannot think of a time in recent history when Democrats have been on the right side of the issue. And I scratch my head. I really want to try and understand what is so appealing to people. You know, where is the Democratic Party appealing to people? That's what I really just cannot understand. That's my comment.
So, I listen, Patrick, one, I thank you for the kind words. And two, the issue of where do the Democrats stand is I honestly think twofold. One, they think that the public will in the midterms hold Republicans accountable by electing Democrats. And they're kind of banking on being the people who get elected because of animosity towards Donald Trump. And that's it. And two, they believe that's going to happen regardless of what they do, so there's no reason to pivot towards the center. They will double down. So let me give you a couple examples of this. This is Pramila Jayapal, the leader of the progressives in the House of Representatives, after the president's speech last night, where he pointed to a child who was seduced by public school officials into transitioning. When she changed her mind, the local progressive judge refused to give her back to her family, even though the girl decided, you know what, this is a mistake, I don't want to transition. This is Congresswoman Jayapal.
And yes, our trans kids across this country who are sick and tired of being bullied because it's not trans kids driving up your rent. It is the billionaires doing that. We are standing up for our trans kids.
Standing up for our trans kids last night in response. Likewise, this is Mayor Mamdani of New York and Alexandria Ocasio doing a team up. They can't pick up the snow in New York City. They can't pick up the trash in New York City. They can't do the basics of government in New York City, but they have time for this.
Hola.
Mi español no es el mejor.
No te preocupes, alcalde. Si su hijo o hija está cumpliendo 3 o 4 años en el 2026, usted puede registrarlos gratis en el programa Kinder 3 o Pre-Kinder de la ciudad de Nueva York. Pero debe registrarse el 27 de febrero, que es la fecha límite. Cualquier padre de la familia de la ciudad de Nueva York, sin importar su ocupación, ingreso o estatus migratorio, es elegible para registrar a sus hijos.
What is that? If you don't speak Spanish, that's the mayor sitting there smiling as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, if you're an illegal alien, you can sign your child up for pre-K and you can take advantage of this, and the city of New York will pay for your child and the resources of the state will go to your child, even if you're an illegal alien. Don't worry about it. Sign your child up. That's right. That is the mayor of New York and the local congresswoman from Brooklyn, who have no time to organize competence for fighting crime or picking trash up or dealing with snow, are telling illegal immigrant parents, don't worry about it. You sign your child up and we will fund your child's education. You don't have to go home. Don't worry about it. I just say, we keep talking about normal people and normies. It's like the press corps going after Team USA for being at the State of the Union. Normal people are proud of Team USA. It's the sports writers of America who are upset. I actually think the sports writers of America are more deeply antagonistic towards the United States than the normal political reporters are. They seem to genuinely hate the United States of America, the sports press. They can't get basics in government done on the Democratic Party side, but they can stand up for your trans kids. Let me just one more time before I get back to calls. I want to play this audio again for you. I've already played it. It's worth playing again. This is the president talking about this child who's now in college at Liberty University, who in the state of Virginia had a guidance counselor begin to essentially seduce her to transition. This is a true story. The kid has told her story. Her mother has told the story. They've talked about how the judge refused to give the child back to her mother because the mother wouldn't support the transition, and the child didn't want to transition either. This girl was raped, placed into a facility for boys because the state insisted she identified as a boy, and the boys took advantage of it. Just listen. I want you again. Listen to this story. This is not a hypothetical. This is not something that didn't happen. This really happened, and the Democrats insist these things don't happen.
Tonight are Sage Blair and her mother, Michelle. In 2021, Sage was 14 when school officials in Virginia sought to socially transition her to a new gender, treating her as a boy and hiding it from her parents. Hard to believe, isn't it? Before long, a confused Sage ran away from home after she was found in a horrific situation in Maryland. A left-wing judge refused to return Sage to her parents because they did not immediately state that their daughter was their son. Sage was thrown into an all-boys state home and suffered terribly for a long time. But today, all of that is behind them because Sage is a proud and wonderful young woman with a full-ride scholarship to Liberty University. Sage and Michelle, please stand up.
That actually happened. And the Democrats refused to stand up for that girl. And after it was over, the leader of the Progressives, Congresswoman Jay Paul, went out and said, "We stand with our trans kids." I guess she would have stood with the state kidnapping this child away from her family, the child who didn't actually want to transition. That's where the Democrats are on these sorts of things. And they're not going to moderate unless they continue to get blown out in political elections. They're not going to. They have no incentive to moderate. Now, switching back to the Iran situation, Ken, let's go to your phone call. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Hey, Eric. You hear me, buddy?
I do.
Okay. Thank you for taking my call. I was talking to the screener, and I thought about Vietnam. And, we were talking about the United States possibly arming the dissidents there in Iran. We basically done that in Vietnam also, even though the south part of the country was, anti-communist. But my point was, how do we know that we are arming the correct people? And I don't want to sound racist. Of course, I can hear it now. But how do you know the good guys from the bad guys? You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked this question, Ken. Yeah, so I actually know the answer to this, and it actually is a legitimate answer. It's not speculation on my part. The United States has, for the last 2 decades, partnered with dissident groups inside Iran there are 2 big factions. One supports the Shah, the return of the Shah. The other supports a democratic effort. There is a party there called MEK. In fact, Alireza Jafzari is part of that party. I didn't push him on the issue. He's not actually, his group is not beloved inside Iran because they backed the Iraqis during the Iraq-Iran war in an effort to destabilize the Iranian regime. So they're not actually as loved, frankly, as the Shah. And people who want to return Reza Pahlavi to the throne in Iran don't really want an absolute monarch. They want a constitutional monarch that will protect democracy. These 2 groups, though, it's widely acknowledged inside and outside Iran, have come to terms with each other. And essentially, we all kind of want a democratic election after this is over, even the people who back the Shah. So let's get rid of the regime first. And then they may start fighting. That's been the concern of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But what we do know is that these groups are vehemently opposed to the Ayatollah, and none of them are Islamic radicals. So we could arm those groups, and they may have a civil war later as they fight over the collapse of the regime, which is a concern, and it's a legitimate one. But concurrently, we also know that in the present structure of Iran, they have all come to terms that the regime must go. So if we arm any of them, they are more committed to ousting the regime than they are to beating up each other. We know this over 20 years of working with them. They have been very helpful to us, both sides, in exposing the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the centrifuge program, where those programs are located, how to get to those programs, what they've been doing under hospitals inside Tehran and Isfahan, among other places. They've been very useful to us. We have long relationships with them. We started these relationships in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan, but in the last 20 years, really since George W. Bush and the Iraq War, we've solidified our relations with these groups. They have fed us intelligence. We have have fed them intelligence. We have provided them equipment inside Iran to get their messages out. So we're not really flying blind in this situation. The concerns are legitimate. When you go around the world and you start building alliances, are we dealing with the good guys or not? We know who the good guys are in Iran. And what we also know in Iran is that the overwhelming majority of the population actually opposes the regime. So if you start pushing a little bit, you set off a series of events, the dominoes start falling, and the regime ultimately falls. And you don't have to go in there militarily. So we have a long enough history in the regime with a deep well of knowledge about the regime to be able to engage in there. Now, interestingly enough, we didn't have a ton of foreign policy in last night's speech. The president did credit Marco Rubio, of course. He got a standing ovation from people around him. And the president, of course, really wanted to focus on the economy. And I can't blame him. In fact, I would be remiss if I didn't also play one more piece of last night's State of the Union about the economy.
Plummeting. Incomes are rising fast. The roaring economy is roaring like never before. And our enemies are scared, our military and police are stacked, and America is respected again, perhaps like never before. After 4 years in which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked, we now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far. In the past 9 months, 0 illegal aliens have been admitted to the United States.
I told you yesterday, every participle of every sentence was going to be an applause line. That's why it lasted so long last night.
But we will always allow people to come in legally, people that will love our country and will work hard to maintain our country.
By the way, the Democrats didn't even cheer at that line. They're just completely sitting down staring at their phone.
The flow of deadly fentanyl across our border is down by a record 56% in 1 year.
Again, the applause, the standing. If I were president, I'd just say, hey, hold the applause. Let me get the speech done.
And last year, the murder rate saw its single largest decline in recorded history. This is the biggest decline, think of it, in recorded history, the lowest number in over 125 years, year 1900. In fact, substantially before my wonderful father, I had a wonderful father, Fred, before he was born, substantially before he was born. That's a long time ago. He wouldn't like me to say that, but that's a long time ago. The Biden administration and its allies in Congress gave us the worst inflation in the history of our country. But in 12 months, my administration has driven core inflation down to the lowest level in more than 5 years. And in the last 3 months of 2025, it was down to 1.7%.
I mean, he's got a record to sell. On the crime record in particular, by the way, CBS News fact-checked the president and said he was right. Murder rate is the lowest it has been in recorded history in the United States. And I just wonder if that had something to do with the deportation of the illegal aliens who the Democrats told us were less likely to commit crime than the American citizens. I got a comment here on Eric Slover. He, Chief Warrant Officer 5, Eric Slover. It looks like an American Henry Cavill. It looks like he could be come straight out of Central Casting as Superman. He obtaining a Chief Warrant Officer 5 in the Army is rare. I'm reading this now online from a Purple Heart recipient. On his right shoulder is a combat patch with Special Operations Command, essentially meaning he's the Delta Force of aviation. He was the first Chief Warrant Officer to receive the Medal of Honor in military history. His combat hashes on his right sleeve total up to 10. One stripe is given every 6 months of active combat duty, which means he's been deployed for 5 years in active duty combat. And then in Venezuela, the Maduro raid, he piloted a helicopter, was shot multiple times, continued, though he was bleeding, to pilot the chopper so that we could capture Maduro and leave. And he is there standing with the assistance of a walker with his family there and got the Medal of Honor. What an amazing American hero. 5 years of active duty combat. Shot multiple times, piloting his helicopter flawlessly to do this raid, kept everyone on the team alive, got him out safely as he continued to bleed. It just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. The guy back in the day apparently was a bodybuilder, got into special operations, joined the Delta Force, and is just, remarkable. What an American hero. Just truly, what a great human being. And the president honored him last night. And, some Democrats refused to even applaud that. Amazing. Let me tell you about Incogni, Incogni, Incogni. I actually got a email from Incogni this morning saying, hey, we found more sites where we think your information is available. Can you help us determine, is this you or someone else? A couple of cases, it was my dad. Some of them were me. And they're going to go send takedown notices to those websites to get my information off. Decided to do my dad's as well to get his information off. When you go get your driver's license and you pay the fee, your state might be one of the states that sells your privacy to data brokers. Your information is for sale. You're not only getting your driver's license, but the state is then marketing you to data brokers, and they get your information, they get your address, they get your birth date, they get all that information from your driver's license. They match it with your social media profiles and your shopping preferences at Amazon and from credit cards. They layer it over and they build a profile that they then retarget and sell. And Incogni takes it all down. If you go to incogni.com/Eric, INCOGNI, incogni.com/Eric, you can get a 60% discount. They will work around the web to take you off the web and make your life private. Incogni.com/Eric.